Welcome everybody to an event which a number of people were excited when we announced, and we immediately had a very quick sign up for this within the first hour on the new Congress in Brazil, not just what happened in the elections a couple of weeks ago, but what the institutional relationship or how it has evolved between the executive and the Congress over the last number of years. We have panelists, 3 experts today who will get into the dynamics as they are, as well as what the overlay of the dynamic with the recent elections. But before we do that, let me just give a few housekeeping details. There will be translation by Jairo Botelho from Portuguese into English. So some of our panelists may be speaking in Portuguese. You can listen to all of it in English. There will be a little bit of Portuguese, some back and forth, English into Portuguese as well, and Beatriz will help us with that interpretation. We will take questions as we always do, so please put them in the question and answer box. You all know how to do that, and we will do our best to weave those questions into the conversation that we have today. We very much welcome your questions. The only other detail or housekeeping detail that I can think of at the moment is that we will announce today, it's the first time public announcement, the launch of our new series on drug reform law or drug reform attempts through law in Latin America. And the first episode will, of course, be on Colombia, where drug reform law is very much a part of the platform of incoming president or current president Gustavo Petro. And we will have a panel discussion that will happen in a couple of weeks' time. Please look out in your emails for the information on that, but we're very, very excited about that series. We will be doing it in conjunction with Redestal and the Political Science Department at Northwestern University in the United States, with collaboration from many other organizations throughout the hemisphere and beyond, we believe. So I think with that out of the way, let's get on to the conversation that we have slated for today on Brazil, new Congress and challenges for the executive branch. We're very fortunate to count on the participation of Carolina Botelho, who is Associate Researcher at Laboratory of Electoral Studies, Political Communication and Public Opinion, Bruno Carazza, who's a columnist at Valor Econômico and a professor at Fundação Cabral, and Beatriz, who's the SNF Agora Visiting Fellow, Johns Hopkins University, and also a Senior Researcher, Center for Studies on Brazilian Congress, State University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you all panelists for being with us today. This is obviously a very important topic that we think deserves coverage. We haven't seen it covered elsewhere, and that's one of the reasons why we think it needs to be covered, and we want to cover it so exhaustively today. With that said, I think I'll start with Carolina. If she could just give us a brief summary of the results of the Congress, the Senate elections concerning the balance of power between the various political forces in Brazil. Carolina, welcome and thank you.
Gracias por la invitación. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure to talk to you, with Bruno and you. I think it's very important to speak about having a transformation for a long time. I worked with industrial relations with the executive, and I'm going to try to make a lot of investigation, a lot of research with the government, the Congress, and at the same time, I try to measure the temperature of society in Brazil. as you all know, it's an urgent moment. We have something that is very important to speak about. We have groups of the legislators in the Senate and the upper chamber. We have a session for the next 4 years. In my first act was we had the last 4 years were very tiresome and driven by a group of politicians who simply appear in the public sphere in Brazil and didn't have the communication that we had, that they needed for political communication. We had to find a formal policies. So the expectation of this political sector after 4 years, a lot of tiresome fatigue. The Congress could still, had a small majority of professional politicians dedicated to the sessions of the Congress and having the relations with the executive and the legislative. The first thing was last week that the movement was not so important last week. We have a new composition of Congress, which is not very professional politicians, which was confirmed with the new delegates, new senators, most of them, unfortunately, of the extreme right and groups that were already interacting with the current president. You know that there's who is very much against the democratic values. So after a long 4 years, there came a new Congress that had new legislators, and they communicate very well, and has been pressured to to democratize. And the people wanted to rest from that, but we're seeing that these are very serious politicians. But on the other hand, we don't see a lot of difference. People don't see a lot of difference between the previous and this current. It's very similar forces, the previous Congress. So it's important, I think, that they should, first of all, have that composition of the new legislation and improve their communications with the current president. This is a big question because it forces me to think that they need the same composition, but at the same time, we have a new communications with the executive. Let's see what sort of leadership we're going to have in the next executive, whether they're going to be able to communicate more legitimately, more institutional and traditionally political with the Congress with the next 4 years.
I can, if I could jump on following Carolina's remarks, and just to expand a little bit on what she mentioned about a shift to the right. What we see is you have a slight increase in the House of Representatives of members from what we call the Centrão, the big center, and a bigger increase in the Senate from of members from these parties. So just to contextualize to our audience, the Centrão, the way I see it, is a group of parties or legislators that are located on the right of the political spectrum, but they lack ideological consistency. So what their main the main feature of their behavior is clientelism or patronage. They want cabinet appointments, cabinet positions, and budgetary grants more than anything else. So in the House, which is where things get more complicated, we have 260 members from the Centrão right now against 258 in the current congressional session. And the Centrão, although the size of this group is almost the same, Jair Bolsonaro's party, the president's party, is stronger in the House right now. It has 99 seats instead of 76 right now. So it's the largest bench, the largest party bench. What does it mean in practice? It means that the Centrão has the necessary number of legislators to form an absolute majority and approve regular bills in the House. And to approve constitutional amendments, they would need an additional 48 legislators. So they have an absolute majority to pass regular bills. The second largest party bench is the Workers' Party, the PT, Lula's party, which increased as well its size. It has now 68 elected against 56 in the current congressional session. The leftist party, all of them together, only have 125 seats, so a lot less than what the Centrão has. So just to, what does this mean in practice? No matter who wins the election, Bolsonaro or Lula, the Centrão will be a key player in executive legislative relations. And I can talk more about that later on, but I think that's the one thing that became clear to me after legislative elections. And I think this is important because we, as Carolina was saying, we don't know exactly how these people behave, right? And importantly, we don't know how they're going to behave in a Lula administration as opposed to a Bolsonaro administration.
Thanks, Beatriz. Bruno, what's your thought about the election results and what it may mean for the power of the Centrão in the new legislature?
Well, Kenneth, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to share my views and my studies about the Brazilian Congress with this Canadian Council attendance. Well, going deep into I think I made a X-ray about the new Congress, trying to take a deeper view about the composition of the Centrão, because this center, right and center politicians here in Brazil Congress, they are split into two groups, as Beatriz has said. We had a Bolsonaristas group, more radical, more more aggressive about the democratic rules of Brazilian democracy, and we had a more clientelist and more traditional politicians that in this current term, they tended to support Bolsonaro. So if we take a look at the profile of the new Congress, as Beatriz has said, Bolsonaro's party, PL, the Liberal Party, and those that are supporting him as the Republicans and the Progressive Party. And we also have to take into account the União Brasil that intends to merge with Progressists. This Bolsonaro's alliance will have almost one half of the House of Representatives and 43% of the Senate. But on this group, as I said, we had a more Bolsonarista politicians and more traditional big center politicians. And according to my calculus, if we take military forces, if we take religious leaders, if we take into account the politicians that are supporting Bolsonaro since its first moment in the government, and if we take into account those current politicians that agree with Bolsonaro's orientation on more than 95% of votes on this Congress, I think Bolsonaro will have a loyal support of about 1/4 of the next House and 1/5 of the Senate. So Bolsonaro, I expect that Bolsonaro will have more influential power than he had on his first term, even if he loses the re-election, because 1/4 of the House and 1/5 of the Senate will be a bloc that will have a great influence on the next Congress, supporting Bolsonaro's views, and will be an obstacle for President Lula if he wins the election.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. I want to come back to some of the specific issues. That was great. I want to, Beatriz and Carolina, do you want to comment on what Bruno said about this? I know you've already touched it.
Can you hear me now, Marta?
You've already touched a little bit on this, but do you agree that this seems to be much greater power now for Bolsonaro and the Bolsonaristas in the legislature than that they had before? Do you agree with that, Beatriz?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I do. I think Bruno's analysis is on point. And I think even in a scenario that he gets reelected, it's even more problematic because Congress has been getting stronger over the last decades, and during his administration, in a way that it's not really good. I would say not institutionalized. I don't know, Kenneth, if you want me to do a recap of what happened in the last 2 decades.
We will get to that. We will get
Okay.
to that. I know you all the 3 panelists have done great scholarly and great analytical work on that. And we definitely are going to have a big block of time for that. So, but if we hold off for the second now, I just want to focus a little bit about the changes that we've been talking a little bit about, and maybe add a little something onto this while you have the mic at this point, Beatriz, and I'll ask Carolina and back to Bruno. Are there specific issues now with the changing composition of the Central and of the legislature that you think will become more important, or that will be of big interest to the Central that they're going to want to move forward with now? Can you think of several issues?
I'm gonna give that to Bruno. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Carolina, do you want to jump in on that? Do you think the new Central has specific issues that they will want to see addressed in the new term?
Sorry, Beatriz, help me, please.
Basicamente, é a pergunta número 3 que ele está fazendo sobre o que o Centrão vai querer fazer agora que, com todo esse cenário que o Bruno descreveu, que eles têm bastante poder. E a gente já tinha falado que o Bruno ia ficar com essa pergunta.
Okay,
Sim.
I will jump on this.
All right, Bruno, I'm going to have Carolina go first, and then you will have the mic.
I'd like to say something before Bruno speaks about the third question. Getting back a little to the composition of the new Congress, going back to Beatriz and Bruno, I find that we have to remember that the central bloc should be, remember this almost every day. The central group is a group of parties. They don't have the same, their own ideology, but they joined the executive to get support. In the center, traditionally, those parties that the center, who they're looking for appointments in the cabinet. That's all they look for. The thing is that this was created in a time when it was very difficult. We need to understand more of the time. It was less ideological and more clientelistic. But now it's very strong, has a very different composition of the Congress. More than the past 30 years. Now, with the current leadership in the central bloc. So this the executive, with the relations with the executives, the more impactful with the central bloc, they can be stronger and they can be more harmful, because Bolsonaro was losing the governing capacity, and he showed many characteristics which were bad for democracy, that the only way to Bolsonaro to keep his leadership was to transfer the power to this group, to this set of parties that is led by the PP and the P, to guarantee their power. So the power was transferred indirectly from the legislative to the executive, from the executive to the legislative, because he was weak. And it limited his own administration. So the elected parties, they would support the current administration.
Thank you, Carolina. Oh, Beatriz, you want to jump in, please?
Yeah, I think I agree in part with what Carolina said, because I'll go back to this later, but I do think that the strengthening of the Centrão is also a product of the strengthening of Congress, and that precedes Bolsonaro by many years. So I think although Bolsonaro abdicated his legislative prerogatives, the strengthening of Congress precedes him. And to me, the difference is until his administration, it was happening in an institutionalized way, and now it's not. So now things got out of the rails. But I can discuss that later. I'll give it to Bruno. Sorry, Bruno.
Yeah, no. Beatriz, we're getting closer to that block of time where we're going to delve into that, exactly what you're talking about, the history behind that. And this is a critical key of what we want to get to today. But you're right, let's let Bruno jump in. I think what Beatriz and what Carolina said are very, very interesting, Bruno, for a lot of reasons. And I know you want to respond to what they've said, but playing off of a question also that we got from Fiona Mackey, and thank you, Fiona, for your question, is while the way it's been described as a Central's patronage and those kinds of other attributes, Lula, on the other hand, if he wins, is maybe playing with a harder composition of a little further to the right than he would like, but he's also very experienced in dealing with Congress and dealing with this kind of a situation. So the question also goes is, despite the further right-wing tilt on the Central, would the Central respect Lula's power and work with Lula in a way that would not necessarily mean they're following what Bolsonaro or the right wing tells them to do? Sort of long question, but hopefully you get what I was trying to say.
Okay, it's an excellent question. Well, if Lula wins, a third term, he will have, just from parties from the left, he will have 25% of the House and less than 20% of the Senate. So he will depend on to attract more politicians from the center. And when we say politicians from the center, we had a traditional center, politicians from parties that used to have huge influence on the Brazilian politicians, like the MDB, like the former Fernando Henrique Cardoso's PSDB, and the Gilberto Kassab's PSD. So it was a bloc from the center that used to rule the legislative power in Brazil since the beginning of the new phase of democracy in Brazil. But this group is losing power and is losing strength in Brazilian politics. So Lula probably will have to negotiate also with Centrão members. But as Carolina has said, that Centrão is a group that tends to adapt to its new government. But I have a point that I don't agree. I don't fully agree with Carolina that Centrão, okay, they adapt to the new government and they can adapt to a new Lula's term. But they are also a very conservative politicians. They are also politicians that, in general, they have support from economic groups, especially from the agribusiness sector in Brazil. So if Lula wins, he will have to negotiate with those groups, and those politicians, they are not expected to, for example, support a progressist agenda from Lula's. So that is why I expect that Lula will have a moderated government. He will have to concede in some aspects, and we cannot. We also have to take into account that economic conditions in Brazil will be hard on the whole world, and here, especially here in Brazil. So probably Lula will have to accept conditions to pass his reforms, and I don't expect a very progressist agenda from Lula on an eventual next term.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. I know, Beatriz, you had your hand up. If you could just wait for 1 second, Beatriz. I just want to do a follow-up with Bruno and then come to you, and then to Carolina again, of course. So based on what you were just saying, Bruno, and sort of the moderating effect, what are there specific issues, tax reform or other kinds of, or, you know, we have a question, although it's slightly different orientation, but you know, on the Amazon, right? You know, and on environment, will, you know, how will that affect the, you know, the what we've been talking about, affect Lula's attempt to do, you know, what he wants to do on some of those or other issues? Do you have some thought about that?
Okay, I think that in the beginning, Lula will try to spend his political gains on the beginning of on this honeymoon in the beginning of the government, of an eventual new government, to pass some economic measures, like fiscal measures and even a tax reform or even an administrative reform. He will have to do with this because the fiscal conditions in Brazil are especially weak after the electoral use of fiscal measures from Bolsonaro in order to try to win the elections. So he will have to pass some agenda on economic terms, and on the environmental agenda and on the Amazon. I think that Lula will, on the first days of his government, he will use his power to change a lot of infralegal measures that Bolsonaro changed during his government. So he will use his power of decree to change a lot of anti-environmental measures that Bolsonaro's government has implemented during this term. And on the Congress regarding environmental agenda, I think that Lula will have problems because the group that supports agribusiness and mining sector is stronger on the new Congress in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Beatriz, thank you for being patient. You have the floor.
I just wanted to add to Fiona's question about Lula and how he will build a coalition in Congress. I think Bruno touched upon one important point, which is how the Centrão will behave. Carolina talked about that as well, but I think there are two other things going on that I think are going to be key for us and for Lula himself to figure out how he's going to handle this Congress that was elected. The first is that the executive branch has fewer tools to build a coalition right now. And I can explain that if people are interested, but the president, Lula, if president, will have fewer tools because of changes that were made for on budgetary grants. So he will have fewer tools. And on top of that, we had a number of institutional reforms this election that reduced the number of parties represented in Congress. So according to what I understand, the president will need the support of about 10 parties and not the 17 that the last president needed, Bolsonaro, at the beginning of Congress to form a coalition. This wouldn't be a problem if the president had all the tools that it had, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. That's not the case. So I don't know how he's going to balance the fact that it's going to be hard for him to find alternatives to, for example, Jair Bolsonaro's party, which has 99 seats in the House, with fewer tools. So I think these other two parameters are going to be very important, and I think people should be looking at them to see how Lula is going to act.
Okay, thank you, Beatriz. Hold on, I want to go to Carolina, and then we're going to come back to talk exactly about the historical evolution, or at least during the last 10 years, I think is a time frame that you've given, or even further perhaps, and what that really means, the structure, the changes in the structural relationship. Carolina, I'm coming back to you. Anything that you've heard from Bruno and Beatriz that you'd like to comment on, or something else about the problems or the challenges Lula will have in trying to do some basic things like environmental issues in terms of protecting the social issues? There's a lot of conversation about, women in Brazil, and violence against women in Brazil, and reproductive rights, and all these kinds of social issues that were were moved by Bolsonaro and sort of his view of what that is. Do you have any thoughts about that, Carolina?
I think that many of the major challenges of President Lula, if he's elected, And she has an important advantage that any political analyst could see if he is elected. He has to make some structural changes again. But if he's elected, President Lula, I think that the biggest challenge, which is different from other administrations, is that the previous administrations is trying to get that majority bloc in Congress, which has split into two parties. Before that, the budget, which is a prerogative of the executive to determine the budgets. That budget that is being implemented in Brazil, it used to be more in the hands of the executive to be able to negotiate with the legislators. Back to the question, in terms of to try to maintain his governance, he gave the public budget to the parties that want to have their own money under any terms. What he needs to do is to negotiate with this new, mostly composed of central bloc, to negotiate with that group and try to get his budget passed. The other agendas, he has the environment, Amazonian area, and I think that after the main debate, he has to be able to decide about that part of the Amazon, and he needs to be able to distribute public resources to, which is a completely electoral expectation. Those are the expectations of the parties, independently of other questions, other variables that are going to be facing the president if he's the new president. The main one for me is who's going to be handling the public resources, how to assign and transfer those public funds.
Thank you, Carolina. I think that sets up perfectly for Beatriz now, the control of the budget and the who actually controls and what aspects of it, and the evolution over the last, as I think we mentioned, decade or a little bit more in that area and other areas in the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch. So Beatriz, maybe this is the time for you to talk a little bit about your insight on the evolution of that relationship and what it means going forward. No matter who wins, actually, no matter who wins the presidential race.
Right, thank you. I just want to say that I fully agree with Carolina. I think that's the main issue right now. Nothing else will get done unless this gets discussed. So I think the first thing I would like to say and reinstate is that Congress has been getting more powerful over the years before Bolsonaro, right? The process really started in the early 2000s with a reform that disincentivized the use of executive decrees, which is one of the president's main legislative tools. And then in 2015 and 2019, in Brazil, we have what we call budgetary grants, which in the US are, these are known as earmarks, now community project funding after the reform. So in Brazil, we have individual earmarks, collective earmarks. What happened prior to these reforms is that the executive could use them as a tool to build support. So we would go to legislators and say, I'm going to actually spend this money if you support my coalition. This ended with the reforms done in 2015 and 19 because it made the spending of these earmarks mandatory. So now whenever they are decided it has to be spent. The money has to be spent. So the executive lost leverage. And that's what I meant a few minutes ago when I said that the president has fewer tools. It doesn't, the president, no matter who is the president, it's not, he will not have these tools, right? What happened during the Bolsonaro administration is a continuation of this process, but in the worst way possible. When Bolsonaro decided to build a legislative coalition halfway through his tenure, he discovered that he could not use the earmarks as a tool to do that. And so what he did together with the House and the Senate speakers is what Brazilian media has coined the secret budget, which is another type of earmark that has been distributed to form Bolsonaro's coalition in non-transparent and sometimes illegal ways. That was the solution Bolsonaro came up with the two speakers. I don't think, so two things can happen. The one thing is that the Supreme Court might take it down. There is a process going on the Supreme Court to analyze that. I don't think they're gonna discard it completely. I think it's more likely that they're gonna change it. But this is key for whoever takes office, right? Either Bolsonaro or Lula. What happens with the secret budget is a very important piece of the puzzle, because right now it's the only thing that gives leverage to the president to build a coalition. Without that, the president only has cabinet positions. So yeah, I think I think Lula also cannot afford to keep it, even if the Supreme Court doesn't act, because it's not transparent. And as I said, the press has been saying it's illegal, or at least parts of it. So I think I agree fully with Carolina. What happens with the budget and who controls the budget, especially the earmarks, is a key part of the process. I don't know if Bruno has something to add to that. I bet he does, because he's nodding. So.
Yeah, thanks, Faces. I'm sure Bruno does. Bruno, the floor is yours.
Well, I agree with Beatriz. During this current term, Bolsonaro has given control of the budget for the Congress, and it's a problem that the last presidents here in Brazil faced. Dilma Rousseff faced this problem, and Michel Temer too. And we are facing gradual and during this Bolsonaro's term, rapid deterioration of the presidential powers in face of improvement of the Congress in Brazilian politics. If we take this Congress, this new Congress, we can expect that this pressure from the Congress will continue in the next term, especially because we don't know who will be the next president, but the next president will have just a slight majority of Brazilian electorate. So the next president won't have an electoral power to impose his will over the Congress, because he will face the opposition of a half of the Brazilian population. So the Congress probably will enjoy this position and will continue to impose his power over the executive in Brazil on the next four years, whoever will be the next president.
So Bruno, let me follow up with that. We've up until now, or part of up until now, we've gone under the assumption or the construct of if it were a Lula victory for the presidency. Let's turn it around. Let's say Bolsonaro wins the presidency. everything that we've been talking about the secret budget, about the growing power of the legislature, about the balance of power, how might that play out in a Bolsonaro presidency?
Well,
It's a simple question, I know, but
yeah. Well, if we analyze the profile of each of the 513 new representatives, we can take the new legislature, the new Congress is split on 4 blocks. We have Bolsonaristas, we have the Central members, we have the old center parties, and we will have the left. So each of them will have almost 25% of the new Congress. So if Bolsonaro will be elected, he will have the support of the Bolsonaristas and also the central members. So probably he will have half of the Congress without needing to negotiate, because he ceded a lot of power to the Congress nowadays. So he will have the control of the half of the Congress, and probably he will push the new Congress to try to control the 3 powers. He will control the executives, he will control the legislative, and probably he will use his power to approve a lot of measures. We don't know if he will increase the number of the members of the Supreme Court, or he will try to impeach some of the current judiciary members. So he will try to control also the Supreme Court. And in this case, probably we will have a deterioration of the democratic conditions in Brazil on the next 4 years, because he will probably control the 3 powers of the Brazilian Republic.
thank you, Bruno. Well, that's uplifting. Carolina, your thoughts about that? The implications of a Bolsonaro victory on the balance of power, and as Bruno said, not just vis-a-vis the legislative branch, but the judicial branch, and any other kinds of major issues that you may want to talk about.
What most calls your attention is that we have a new renewal that they have a new bigger turnout than in the past elections. He got he elected at 1/3 of the House. With Bolsonaro, he's going to have a great leadership, a great majority there. In the part of the Senate, he's together with Bolsonaro. He's very connected to Bolsonaro. He is a part of the large group of Bolsonaro party members. And as you said, they can become a majority for any things that he wants to do. Or he can inclusively increase the number of ministers in the administration. I think that the parties are not making such major differences between the executives, but what they can get out of it. That's a big question. how much they're going to get and how to be able to separate. Not they're trying to change the current Republican administration. They're going to become a force to violate the people's rights. They know that that is the danger. They've seen what Bolsonaro can do so far. It would take more radical measures. He could close the Congress, or he could, and people don't are having those doubts. So far, this is a number of legislators are with Bolsonaro right now. It's not so different from the previous administrations, different Congresses, but they have the fear of the leadership that have had such anti-democratic behaviors. There is a concern from those legislators. They have acted similarly to previous years, and that's clearly would be based to support the president, although they don't, not the majority. I think that the central bloc can change their focus according to the new president that is elected. He could,
Okay, thank you, Carolina. So Beatriz, I'm putting together what Bruno said and what Carolina said. And I'm thinking that despite the power of the legislature, because of the way it's currently composed, and because of the way Bruno and Carolina just framed it for us, under a Bolsonaro victory, it may be that the legislature isn't much of a blocking mechanism for some of the bad or worst excesses of what a Bolsonaro presidency might look like. Because do you see the legislative branch exerting any real power or counterbalance?
I think I'm going to go back to what I said about the lack of tools, right? I think regardless of who wins the election, the president needs to have tools to build a coalition. And we don't have clarity on what's going to happen in relation to that. If Bolsonaro is reelected and the Supreme Court ends the secret budget, he's going to have to find a new tool. So I think there's, besides the fact, as Carolina and Bruno were saying, that we still don't know what this Centrão looks like, although I tend to agree with Bruno's breakdown of police officers and agribusiness. I think these people are very ideological, even though it's not a party ideology, right? It's a different sort of ideological cohesiveness that we have there. But regardless of that, like, the president's going to need tools. Bolsonaro is going to need tools. And if the Supreme Court dismantles the secret budget, he's going to have to find a new one. I don't think that legislators are interested in losing the power that they have received. I don't think anybody in politics is interested in losing power. So I think we should expect a Congress, if given the proper incentives by Bolsonaro, to support him even more, because they're getting, so just for you to have an idea, the earmarks in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, the amount of federal investments done through earmarks jumped from 8% in 2017 to almost 40% in the next budgetary year. So it's a lot of money that Congress controls right now, right? It's a lot of money. I don't see Congress wanting to lose that power regardless of the administration. And I think that the secret budget is a key for that. So I would encourage people to watch the next moves of the Supreme Court in relation to that, because besides who gets elected, we need to see what's going to happen with the secret budget.
Thank you, Beatriz. We're pretty much near the end of our hour, but I'll ask all three of you, starting with Bruno and then Carolina, finishing with Beatriz, just very briefly, any final comments or thoughts that you want to add before we finish? Bruno, any final thoughts? Oh, you're on mute, Bruno.
Sorry.
Now you're off mute. Great,
I
thanks.
would just thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share my views about the Brazilian politics. And I will emphasize that due to this new balance of the Congress in Brazil, I think that we'll face some difficult times if Bolsonaro wins and tries to implement his autocratic agenda on the next term. And even if Lula wins, he will probably have to govern with a coalition of more centered or center-right representatives in addition to the left. So I think that the Congress will have the power to maintain these tools that that Beatriz has said about the budget tools, the legislative prerogatives, and I don't expect a progressist agenda from Lula, because he won't have the political support in Congress to pass, and he will have more troubles than he had 20 years ago when he was a president. So I think that Lula will have a less ambitious government than his current electoral promises. And this the reality we'll face in the next 4 years, in my view. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bruno. Carolina, any final thought or two?
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak about politics in Brazil. And I see my expectations in two ways. The first is if we re-elect the current president, it would be a loss to our democracy. I think the democracy will be decreased. He would be going more into an autocratic form of government. It was going to lose legitimacy. And thinking about new scenarios, it is going to be more probable than Lula Silva would have. I have a democratic view. They would be strengthened. It would be a different administration, but we're seeing a very serious fiscal situation, a fiscal situation which is also very serious. That we need to recover the power of the budget by the executive in the medium or short term. So he needs to legitimize the democratic institutions during the second term. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolina. Beatriz, you have the honor of the last word.
I wanted to say thank you to you, Kenneth, and to Marta for putting this panel together. I love Congress. I know it's a contentious position to have in Brazil, but I do love the institution, so it's a pleasure for me to talk about it anytime. I just want to second what both Bruno and Carolina said. I do think that if Bolsonaro gets reelected, we're going to see even more democratic erosion in Brazil. And I think that's where I draw the line in terms of saying my political preferences. I'm pro-democracy. So because of that, I really hope that Lula gets elected.
Yeah, it sounds, the last little bit, it sounded a bit what President Obama said about Donald Trump, saying that he thought the US democracy could withstand 4 years of Donald Trump. He wasn't sure it could withstand 8. And it sounds like exactly what the summary comments were from all 3 of you. Thanks you again for your time. Thanks for all our listeners. A video of this event will be posted today, hopefully, no later than tomorrow on our website at ccacanada.com. So it's free and it's accessible to all. Thank you for joining us again, and we hope to see you next time. This is not an issue which we will ignore going forward. So we hope to count on all 3 of you panelists again. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.